Desperate times call for desperate measures, and that's where we are. Thank you for joining. Let me explain to you about what's going on here and what you can expect. We have various different cameras going on in addition to the people who are present for this Torah service. So you should know that you have one of the Ari Goldstein cameras is directed on Cantor Wolf. You've got Temple Beth Shalom, wide angle on the Bima, and then you have another Ari Goldstein, nice and close, of which I just stuck my face into. And the reason why is we're going to use this one a little bit later so you can follow along with the Torah. By the way, if you're wondering where Cantor Wolf is, she is way over there. Hi. And suffice it to say, if you just want a little behind the scenes, yep, this is what it looks like in here. It's all empty. Well, except for one person. That's Mary West, who has been extraordinary in helping us manage our High Holiday services. And so let's get started. We're sorry for the delay, but as you know, the service ended when it did. And so we just needed a few minutes to get ourselves set up. So when we first appeared on the stage of world history, a book was in our hands. This book, this sacred scroll. And we were told, this is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart. And we were told, you can surely do it. And then we learned, this is where heaven and earth touch. We are the people of the book. Through fire and mud and dust, we have borne our scrolls tenderly as a baby swaddled in a blanket, traveling with our words sewn in our clothes and carried on our backs. Let us take up the scroll of Torah and cherish it, for just as our hearts connect with these sacred words, so do these words enrich our lives. So our service continues as we take the Torah out of the ark. If you have the prayer book before you, it is on page 227, and we continue with Ein Kamocha. If you are seated, we invite you to please rise as we take the Torahs out of the ark. Ein Kamocha.
Ein Kamocha Elohim Adonai, ve'ein k'ma'asecha. מלכותך, מלכות כל עולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, לעולם ועד. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו השלום. אהבה רחמים היטיבה ברצונך את ציון. תבנה חומות ירושלים, כי בך לבד פתחנו, מלך אל רם ונישא, אדון עולמים. אדוני, אדוני, אל רחום וחנון, אדוני, 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 אל רחום וחנון, אדוני, ערך אפיים ורב חסד, רב חסד ואמת, נוצר חסד לאלפים, נושא עוון ופשע וחטא ונקם. El Rachum v'Chanun Adonai. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Echad
Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai,
Kadosh v'norah Shemo. Gadlu l'Adonai iti, u'neromema Shemo yachdav. Lecha Adonai ha'gerura v'ha'gevura v'ha'tiferet v'ha'netzach v'ha'hod.
Ki chol v'shamayim u'va'aretz,
Kichol v'shamayim u'va'aretz.
Okay, so we have an unusual, what we're going to do here, and Mary, get ready, but not yet, but get close. We are going to be reading from the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, and missing something there, I'll figure it out in a minute. So in order to do this, though, I'd like to, I'll be chanting the blessing, and then we will have past presidents of our congregation will each say amen to the blessing. And so, Yahamdu kol nasim sha'avrim. The blessing of the Aliyah can be found on page 230. Baruch hu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam va'ed. Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam va'ed. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch ata Adonai noten ha'Torah. Amen. Wait 1 second. They need to, so whoever's saying amen in order needs to unmute yourself.
Amen.
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 Is that help, Mary? Is that it or more? That's it.
ויהי אחר הדברים האלה, והאלוהים נישא את אברהם, ויאמר אליו, אברהם, ויאמר הנני, ויאמר קח נא את בנך, את יחידך אשר אהבת את יצחק, ולך לך אל ארץ המוריה, ועלהו שם לעולה על אחד ההרים אשר אומר אליך. וישכם אברהם בבוקר, ויחבוש את חמורו, ויקח את שני נעריו איתו, ואת יצחק בנו, ויבקע עצי עולה, ויקום וילך אל המקום אשר אמר לו האלוהים. ביום השלישי ויישא אברהם את עיניו, וירא את המקום אשר מרחוק, ויאמר אברהם אל נעריו, שבו לכם פה עם החמור, ואני והנער נלכה עד כה ונשתחווה ונשובה אליכם. ויקח אברהם את עצי העולה, וישם על יצחק בנו, ויקח בידו את האש ואת המאכלת, וילכו שניהם יחדיו. ויאמר יצחק אל אברהם אביו, ויאמר אבי, ויאמר הנני בני, ויאמר הנה האש והעצים ואיה הסלע עולה. ויאמר אברהם, אלוהים יראה לו הסלע עולה בני, וילכו שניהם יחדיו. ויבואו אל המקום אשר אמר לו האלוהים, ויבן שם אברהם את המזבח, ויערוך את העצים, ויעקוד את יצחק בנו. וישם אותו על המזבח נמעל לעצים. וישלח אברהם את ידו, ויקח את המאכלת לשחוט את בנו. ויקרא אליו מלאך אדוני מן השמיים, ויאמר, אברהם, אברהם. ויאמר, הנני. ויאמר, אל תשלח ידך אל הנער, ואל תעש לו מאומה, כי אתה ידעתי, כי ירא אלוהים אתה, ולא חסכת את בנך את יחידך ממני. וישא אברהם את עיניו, וירא, והנה עיל אחד נאחז בסבך בקרניו. וילך אברהם, ויקח את העיל, ויעלהו לעולה תחת בנו. ויקרא אברהם שם המקום ההוא, אדוני יראה, אשר יאמר היום בהר אדוני יראה. ויקרא מלאך אדוני אל אברהם שנית מן השמיים. ויאמר, בי נשבעתי נאום אדוני, כי יען אשר עשית את הדבר הזה ולא חסכת את בנך את יחידך. כי יברך אברכך, והרבה ארבע את זרעך ככוכבי השמיים, וכחול אשר על שפת הים. וירש זרעך את שאר אויביו, והתברכו בזרעך כל גויי הארץ, עקב אשר שמעת בקולי. וישב אברהם אל נעריו, ויקומו וילכו יחדיו אל באר שבע, וישב אברהם בבאר שבע.
Nice job. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
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 All right. So, I can't tell if it's an echo or not. So I just can't begin to tell you how delighted I am to see so many of our past presidents here. Some who I've met once or twice, who have moved far away, and yet through this miracle of modern technology, we're able to be together, and we're able to honor you, at least to some degree, with the fact that you've been a past president of our congregation. So to all of our presidents and past presidents, and trust me, I've gotten to know so many of you in such a close and meaningful ways. I know just how hard it is to be president, and I know just how much time and effort it takes to be the president of this congregation. And I can't begin to tell you just how much I am so appreciative of the efforts that you have made to help make this congregation what it is today. So thank you, Toda Rabah, to all of our presidents. So at this time, I'm going to lift up the Torah in a tradition that is called Hag Baha, for everyone to see exactly what it is that where we read from, but you got such an up-close view of it, I don't think we even need to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway, out of tradition, not like you needed it. So though, if you are seated, and we're going to raise the Torah, so I invite you to stand up.
וזאת התורה שעשה משה לפני בני ישראל. על פי אדוני ביד משה.
All right, you can be seated. I just employed our Torah reader to assist us by holding the Torah also. I don't know if she knew what she was getting herself into, because it's going to be like 15. We'll switch off if need be. What's that? She has 4 children, she said, so she can handle holding a Torah. If you can hold a baby, you can hold the Torah. Let me just adjust this just in case you've decided to go with the close-up. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about this Torah portion and tell you that many people would argue that this is indeed the most intense story in the Torah. It's the story, the Akedah, which tells of the binding or near sacrifice of Isaac. It's a chapter that staggers the imagination. A good God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. How could God do it? And Abraham, as we know, is ready to do it. He's ready to take the son that he has waited for so many years, the son that represents his future, the son whom God has promised to be the continuer of a great destiny, the only son who was supposed to be the first of the descendants that would be as numerous as the sands on the seashore and the stars in the sky, and bring him up as an offering. How could this be? Generations of readers, poets, playwrights, artists, and sculptors, medieval and modern Jews and Christians have struggled with this story. I mentioned this story in my sermons earlier, that Isaac thought he was a gift while Abraham was distraught. You know, there are only 22 verses in this entire story, and yet there are many more commentaries on this story than words in this story. Most of the commentaries can be divided into 2 camps. The first is the one held by Moses Maimonides, the Rambam, and Soren Kierkegaard, just to name 2 of many. The purpose of the story, according to them, is to teach obedience to God. It makes no difference what God commands. Ours is not to reason why, ours is but to comply with whatever God asks. One must suspend one's own judgment and one's own will before God's. If you understand the story this way, then Abraham's willingness to do God's command and his silence in the face of enormous personal sacrifice is downright heroic. However, there is another way to understand this story. The Gerar rabbi in his book Sfat Emet, along with a modern-day rabbi, Harold Kushner, amongst many others, suggest that the test in this story was not to see if Abraham would obey, but rather the test was to see if Abraham would protest. When God was about to destroy the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, he first sent angels down to warn Abraham of his intention. Perhaps he did it to see if Abraham would protest and speak out for the possible injustices that would be done. And Abraham passed the test. He spoke up and defended the potential innocents. Now, when his own son is involved, Abraham remains silent. Can the same be said for us as well? Do we find ourselves giving more to others while our own loved ones are unintentionally ignored? Perhaps this is the reason why God never speaks to Abraham again after the Akedah. If you read carefully, it's not God who ultimately tells Abraham to spare Isaac's life, but an angel. The Akedah is Abraham's most poignant moment, yet only an angel speaks to him on this day, not God. For so many people, this further proves that Abraham failed the test. And so I would like to facilitate a discussion about the Akedah and why we read it on Rosh HaShanah. Perhaps it is to remind us of the heroism of a patriarch who was blindly obedient. Perhaps it's to teach us that every day of our lives is examination day, and that we should recognize how often we are being tested. Perhaps it's to implore us to speak out against injustice in the same way Abraham did in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but didn't do in this story. Perhaps it's trying to tell us something about our families or our relationships. Now, what I'd like to do is separate you into breakout rooms for 10 minutes, maybe 8 minutes. In these more intimate settings, I invite you to share your thoughts about why you think we read this text on Rosh HaShanah, or what you think this text is trying to teach us. And when we come back, you can share a little bit about what you thought, and we can kind of bring this to a conclusion with some other thoughts. So allow me to break you into individual groups. But wait. If you're watching this on stream, tough luck. You're gonna just see maybe, who knows, you may see an image, but it's gonna be a silent image for a little while. So if you're interested in sharing your thoughts, I invite you to raise your hand in the participant section. Again, if you choose to raise your hand on the camera, I will not see you. I'm just telling you now, I will not see you. So don't feel insulted if I don't call on you because you raised your hand in the camera. All I'm gonna do, you gotta go to participants and click raise hand, and then I will call on you. So, Michael, let's start with Noah. Noah, tell me, what did you think?
Sure. So I was in a breakout room. One of the people in my breakout room was Greg Walker, and he gave a really interesting perspective. He gave us a comparison to the story of Noah and a contrast to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where in Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham questioned 4 or 5 times about if there's 50 people, if there's 20 people, if there's 10 people, if there's 5 people that are good people, will you save the cities? And Abraham tried his best to find those people.
Right.
Whereas with the story of Noah, Noah simply did as God told him to do. He built the ark, he got in with his family and the animals, and everyone else on the earth was wiped out. He didn't bother to question whether there were other good people left on the planet.
Right. So what do you think about this in Rosh Hashanah?
So with this in Rosh Hashanah, it gives us a perspective of thinking about how can we react to things? How can, in the new year, how can we question? How can we understand what's going on? How can we be active? I think that's a way to look at it.
Very nice. So it's like, it's kind of like the idea of like recognizing that just as Abraham was tested, you know, we have to see things about how we are constantly being tested by life. And how are we going to, as we move forward in the year, how do we want to be? Who do we want to, what part of Abraham do we want to model ourselves off of? I love it. Michael Rubenstein.
Yeah, so a couple things. We had a really good question, which I don't think I could answer, from young Mr. Esposito.
Oh, God.
Who asked if Abraham failed the test, and why did God let him become the leader of the Israelites?
Well, can I answer that for John? And that is, he wasn't the leader of the Israelites. He was simply the first Jew. Moses was the leader of the Israelites. The fact is that, you know, it's that Abraham, all of our biblical characters are flawed in some way or another. Specifically, Moses is flawed because it's trying to show us that really we're all flawed. Now, the question is, you know, and so Abraham is held up to be kind of extraordinary and the father of our people, but Abraham has numerous flaws. I say this to John too. And what I would like to just go, but the question is, so maybe what you're pointing out is, maybe he failed the test. Maybe God wanted him to stand up for his son, and Abraham didn't. It's really a possibility, but keep going, Michael.
Well, I mean, just the notion that, you know, if you're going to pick somebody to be the father of your people, maybe you want to pick somebody who's more worthy.
Right.
The only thing I pointed out was, you know, Abraham didn't entirely fail because even though he didn't really speak up, he did sort of passively aggressively resist. But he didn't.
By stalling, Yep, but you're right. You're right. It's a good point. Thanks. Barry Meisenberg.
Good afternoon. We were on with Rick Rubel and Dick Hack. So a few questions, no answers, of course. Was this in fact Abraham's test of God and not God's test of Abraham?
Well, it's a great thought, and it's a great possibility. We've talked about that in our Torah study before.
Yes. Where was Sarah's voice?
Specifically absent. There's no doubt about it.
In fact, we learn right after that she's died, and I wonder if the two events are linked. They're close together in the story.
And for sure, by the way, Abraham never speaks with Sarah again either. So it affects their relationship tremendously.
Something's missing, either inserted in here out of order, or there's a chunk that's missing, because there's another half. Maybe someone will write a book about it if someone already has it. And then
the Midrash, one second, the Midrash goes on to talk about like what happened after that. You know, they don't come down, Abraham and Isaac don't walk down together. God never speaks to Abraham again. Abraham never speaks to Sarah again. Sarah dies. Abraham remarries. There's a lot of stuff that goes on between that, and the Midrash talks about it. Keep going, Barry. Sorry.
Well, it's all worth speculating and thinking about. And then, of course, what about the other son? The Bible says, the story here says, take your son, your only son, the one you love. And we know that's not true.
Right, because he loved Ishmael just as much. The Midrash has a field day with that one. When it says, take your son, the Midrash goes on to say, but Abraham says, yeah, I've got two sons. And the Midrash says, the one you love. And Abraham says, I love them both. And he says, your only son. And he says, well, this is the only son to this mother, and this is the only son to this mother. And then God says, Isaac. That's because that's the way that the Torah goes on. Take your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac. And so in the Midrash specifically has that conversation happen. So you're totally right about it.
Well, one wonders if it was written to make sure everyone understood that Isaac is the son. To love. So it's sort of someone rewriting the facts to satisfy the national legend, as it were.
You know what the Quran has to say? The Quran has Ishmael, the one who was nearly sacrificed.
Sure, yeah. Well, I got 2,000 years of catching up to do. 2,000 years of Midrash to catch up on.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jack Blum. Tell me what the Cheder would say about this. You got to unmute yourself, Jack.
I'm of the view that that not only was this a question of who was punishing who or the like, that the real issue here is an issue of free will and distance from God. Avram wound up being distant from God when God doesn't talk to him again. The problem we all have is if you believe absolutely and you have to do everything that God says, it's pretty paralyzing, because every minute of every day becomes the problem of have I lived up to it? And yes, probably as we live our lives, that wouldn't be a bad thing to do. But for most people, that's not really a possibility. And there has to be, I would say, some wiggle room and enough distance so that there's a dialogue and not simply blind obedience.
But the story of Sodom and Gomorrah has that very dialogue you're talking about. You know, when God says, I'm going to destroy the cities, and Abraham says, what happens if there's 50 innocent people? All right, I won't destroy for 50. What about 20? What about 10? What about 5?
Yeah, okay, but these are different stories from different places, and they come to the same end result.
You're right. You're right. You're right. Thank you so much. Barbara, would you like to share a thought?
Yes, as a mother that is very kid-centered, I look at it from a family point of view of Abraham is supposed to be the head of the family. He was supposed to protect his family and not abuse his son and ignore his wife. What is God saying that I think he was at a real failure in trying to protect his family. He was more concerned with protecting people he didn't know in Sodom and Gomorrah, and not as concerned with how he should protect his own family.
Yep. Yep.
And in this time where we're now luckily back with our families, I know my nephew is joyful that his adult children are back with him. And we're trying to protect our families from this pandemic. It says we should be more concerned about protecting our families. My thought.
Nice thought. So, thank you. Let me just throw out one more thought, and then we'll return the tour to the ark. And that is, it's so it's alluring to think about this story about being about Abraham and Isaac. I like to think, believe it or not, that the main character of this story is the ram that was caught in the thicket. Fact is that we read this story. Now, granted, in general, this story may not be about the ram, but for us on Rosh HaShanah, this story is about the ram, because that ram is the shofar is our symbol of that ram that Abraham used in place and sacrificed in place of Isaac. And when we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, what we're saying is, there's lots of interpretations, wake up call and rise up to action. But, ultimately the shofar is also as a scream out to God. And that scream to God is, hey, don't forget about what Abraham did for us, what you put Abraham through, and what you promised Abraham as a result, that our descendants would be as numerous as the stars in heaven, sands on the seashore. And when we blow the shofar, it's like a reminder, it's like a Pavlovian bell for God. God is supposed to salivate when God hears the shofar, because that's our way of saying, don't forget what you promised us. This is our reminder to you. And so I know that this has been a little bit of an unusual experience, this Torah discussion. I hope that it was a pleasant experience to kind of get to know other people in a smaller environment in these breakout rooms. And before we close, I'm going to give you a chance to vote. What do you think about the story of the binding of Isaac? You can vote as many times as you want, or pick as many as you want to. Was Abraham a faithful servant and passed the test? Should he have argued for his son and he therefore failed the test? Is it teaching us a lesson that every day of our lives is examination day? Is it calling us to speak up against injustice as we wish Abraham had done? Is it demonstrating how hard it is to navigate through family issues? Is it telling us that we should try to be as God-fearing as Abraham, or is it telling us something else? Feel free to vote. I cannot believe no one's voted yet. Maybe you're still thinking.
I can't vote.
You can't vote? Oh, maybe you. Oh, right. You're right. Is it possible no one has voted yet?
I voted.
I voted.
How come I don't see it?
Pretty hard choice.
I voted.
I voted.
Well, good. I'm glad you have, but it's not showing up here. Maybe that what's going on is that because maybe the computer is.
Voted.
I'll bet. I don't know. Well, I can't wait.
We didn't mail them.
Yeah, tell me that. It's like the post office. All right. So you got 20 more seconds to vote. and then we're going to end this poll, and we're going to return the Torah to the ark. Give you 15 more seconds. I'm going to start whistling the Jeopardy music. You can't whistle. Have anyone tried to whistle underneath the mask? It doesn't work so well. All right, poll's over. Yeah, it says maybe I'll be able to see it another way. Okay, anyway, we're going to return the Torah to the ark. We are on page 277. We conclude with Eitz Chaim He. Please rise if you are seated.
Poll results are up.
What's that?
The poll results are up.
Oh, good. I'm the only one who can't see it. All right, doesn't matter. Please rise.
Eitz Chaim Hi, lama chazikim ema, v'tomcha mirushay derachea dorchenum v'chol netivoteh shalom hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuvah kadesh yameinu kekerem.
Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this. Look forward. Hopefully, you'll come and be a part of our outdoor parking lot shofar service. Come on, even if you don't have a shofar, just honk your horn. Come on out and honk your horn. Be a part of it with us. Shana Tova. Thanks, everyone, for being here with me.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, shalom.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, everybody.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shana Tova.
Uvracha.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was great.
Shana Tova. My pleasure.
Shana Tova, Rabbi.
Yes.
Tova.
Lashana Tova. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Cantor. And thank you, Annapolis Corral.
Yes.
Shana Tova.
I'll tell them. Heidi's joining. Love it when joins. You can you can quit that if you want. There's a Cantor, excuse me. All right, I'm going to end it for everybody anyway.